When Sajid Javid was appointed Home Secretary after the Windrush scandal, it was a breath of fresh air. He was an effective business secretary and as community secretary openly admitted government failures over Grenfell. He's also the son of a Pakistani bus driver at a time when Islamophobia is rising and one of the biggest threats to our national security is Islamist terrorism. Here was a clear sign from Mrs May that Britain didn't tarnish all those from an Islamic background with the same brush. So you can imagine my shock and dismay when this week Sajid Javid himself tweeted a blanket statement about the Asian community in relation to the Huddersfield grooming gangs. We all accept these horrific crimes were racially motivated, but Javid's tweet was so badly worded, I had to read it twice to make sure I was seeing right. Sadly, just as internalised misogyny is real, so is internalised racism. Sometimes when people from discriminated backgrounds are in positions of power, they can feel the need to prove themselves in this way. Sajid Javid, of all people, should know better. In these troubling times, he should be trying to bring us together, not sow further division.
Before I come back, we should read the tweet out that caused you so much offence. What Sajid Javid said was, these sick Asian paedophiles are finally facing justice. I want to commend the bravery of the victims. For too long, they were ignored. Not on my watch. There will be no no-go areas. OK, so what he said there, he called these monsters, he called them sick, and he called them Asian, and he called them paedophiles. And he's right on every count. Their ethnicity was intrinsically linked to what they did. Their ethnicity is what stopped gangs in Rotherham, Rochdale, Telford being caught for more than a decade. It meant that thousands of young girls were raped, drugged, girls as young as 11, raped and drugged by gangs of Pakistani grooming gangs. Now, this is not racist to say that. Because if we say it's racist to point out their ethnicity, that means we betray these girls yet again. These girls were betrayed by the police, by local authorities, by councils, by social services, because they were Asian and they didn't want to be accused of racism and go after these guys. But I'll let you come back at me. But the Quillian think tank produced a report this week. Not this week, recently, that said 84% of people convicted for child grooming crimes were Asian. And of 264 crimes, 222 were committed by Asians. June, we have to talk about that. We have to talk about the reasons why. And then I'll shut up, I promise. I'll leave the floor. The people they targeted, the girls they targeted, were mainly white.
I said this.
Yes, they're mainly white. So if we're talking about a group of people who were targeted because they were white, why can't we talk about the ethnicity of the people who were targeting them?
I'll come back on that. Well, first of all, can I say Nick and I were with the Home Secretary yesterday and I actually told him that I would be discussing his tweet and that I was completely against it. And he actually said, go for it. I look forward to watching the show.
I suggested you were arrested, but he wouldn't go along with that, unfortunately.
There are a couple of things here. I think the whole point is we know that these terrible acts were racially motivated. My issue with Sajid Javid's quote is how he worded it. Because you can still reference the fact that these attacks were racially motivated without it being a blanket statement that involves all Asian people. He just said sick
Asian paedophiles. What's wrong with that?
I totally agree with what David Lammy had to say on this. And can I bring that up? Because his quote on this, I think, was spot on. He said, by singling out Asians, he not only panders to the far right, but increases the risk of violence and abuse against minorities across the country. Whatever the underlying motives of the offenders involved, paedophilia is an abhorrent crime that affects all communities. Let me finish. It does no service to the victims of this evil to pin the blame on any one group.
It's not singling out Asians. 84% of child grooming crimes were committed by Asians. What's singling them out?
But the majority of paedophile rings are committed by white people. We would never...
The majority, 84%,
we wouldn't put it in that way.
June,
Please, go on.
I think the issue... I mean, I think his tweet, you can make up your mind whether it's offensive or should be... But there is an issue here. In town after town after town, when we have seen these, these are basically men of Pakistani origin.
That's the key. Because when you say Asian, you could be Japanese.
Thank you.
I agree. Men of Pakistani origin.
singling out white
It seems to me
girls.
what is needed.
Accept it's
I
racially
would love to see a
motivated.
serious piece of research or an inquiry into were these connected, or did they all just happen ad hoc? I have no idea.
Well, of course, it's right to say that it's the majority who are of Pakistani. There are Somalis were involved in the Bristol incident.
But the majority.
Let's turn. I thought Alison Pearson, and it's important that we bring in a woman who is also a mum, a journalist and author, says this: I'm afraid the facts are as plain as they are unpalatable. Certain male members of one community, still steeped in notions of female chastity, honour and shame, somehow feel it's OK to help themselves to vulnerable girls in the majority community, which prizes neither chastity nor honour and is to all intents and purposes shameless. If, and to pick up on Carol's point, if, and he's absolutely right, it probably needed the word mostly Pakistani in there somewhere. But if you don't acknowledge those facts, and I know you would never want this, you run the risk of another Rotherham or another Rochdale or another Telford.
Nick, I am not saying that we don't acknowledge it. I am just saying the way he worded this tweet was so clumsy, and actually it was a dog whistle to the right. And I think, and I'm sorry, no, let me finish. And I think actually, back to my point about internalised racism, sometimes what happens, in the same way you can have women in positions of power and they're harsher on other women than a man would be, I actually think sometimes when you have somebody from a discriminated group in a position of power, they feel they need to prove that they will be extra harsh when it's from a group that comes from the same ethnic group as themselves. Sorry, Michelle.
I just find this absolutely staggering because again, I don't agree with you.
No, I know.
I think she said that, don't worry.
No, I don't agree with you, and I find it staggering that we are still contemplating whether describing these perpetrators as Asian is offensive or not. It's a fact. Whether it's whether people take offence by that.
There were majority Pakistani.
But one of my concerns.
Asia's a big continent.
Yeah, it is a big continent.
There's a lot of people, and you don't use blanket terms like this.
So would you?
Well, not all, majority.
I would have said majority. I would have said racially motivated attack.
My point is that people are disgusted by the likes of Tommy Robinson. People think it's disgraceful that people like he exist. And I argue back, and what I say to that is the reason why people like Tommy Robinson are getting more and more momentum is because there is a massive sense that if people try to point out factually correct things, they are suppressed because of political correctness. And what I'm saying is that I know it might not be your point, but my point is linked. And what I'm saying is that at the end of the day, you have to be able to talk about situations as they stand without suppressing things for fear of causing offence or political correctness. Because when you don't, what happens is, like Sadiq Khan here, when he's talking about the phrase that Sajid Javid used, he's talking about, it's clear that Conservative politicians think that the way to succeed is by playing to the far right. It's not far right to identify... Well, do you think it's far right?
I think it... No, let me finish. No. I think it's pandering. I think it's pandering to a certain section of society.
Can we Sajid Javid as well as I do? You would never do that, Jude.
No, but I think this... And we were with him yesterday, but I do think that Sajid Javid, like many politicians, is somebody who is looking to become leader. It's a need to prove yourself in a way that...
June, is there another danger that because we haven't accepted this
and
looked at it seriously and done the proper research and tried to understand what's happening, because of that, actually what you do is you encourage the far right. You encourage the people who might support them because they think no one is doing anything about it.
But my point is I completely accept it, and I completely totally acknowledge that these crimes were racially motivated. They were going for girls that were white. They were not going for girls from the Pakistani community.
Can we hear from one of these girls? I think it's really important.
They used to buy you gifts, give you cigarettes, alcohol, cannabis, and then I was in a relationship with one of them, and then it's like you just start getting passed around to the friends and stuff. Some days you're waking up and you don't even know how you ended up in certain places. You can't remember what happened to you. It's like the older ones pass it down to the younger generation. So history will just keep on repeating itself as long as that happens.
You don't think there's been any change at all?
No, I don't think there has.
And that concerns me and makes me sick to my stomach. And all I want to say is, I highlight again, it's not far right to point out common obvious facts, and it is not far right to point out the ethnicity of a group of people if that is the common thing that people feel is an aggregating factor as to why they're committing those crimes.
I just want to add to that. What I'm saying is, when it is done by somebody who is white, we add the distinction. We would say a white supremacist or whatever. We wouldn't say all white paedophiles.
But he didn't
They
say
got away
all
with this for so
Asian.
long,
Okay.
precisely because